You know, when we look back at history, we tend to think we have a pretty solid grasp on the people who shaped it.
Right.
We basically operate under the assumption that our data is complete.
Yeah, we think we know the whole story.
Exactly. So let's just test that for a moment. Picture this scenario.
Okay, ready.
So on a freezing cold January day, a 43-year-old man is sworn in as the chief executive of his country. And standing right beside him is his predecessor, a really famous general who, like 15 years prior, had commanded his nation's armed forces in a massive global war.
Right. Paints a very specific picture.
It does. And this young, newly minted leader, he was raised in the Roman Catholic faith.
Okay.
So following the swearing-in ceremony, he spends the next 5 hours watching parades held in his honor, and he stays up celebrating with his inner circle until like 3 o'clock in the morning.
I mean, it sounds like an incredibly cinematic, almost iconic historical moment.
It really does. And if you are listening to this right now, your brain is actively doing what human brains do best, which is recognizing patterns and filling in the blanks.
Based on your existing assumptions.
Exactly. You hear about a cold January inauguration.
Right.
You hear about a young Catholic war veteran taking office. You hear about the general standing beside him. You are almost certainly assuming I am describing John F. Kennedy taking the oath of office next to Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Which, honestly, based on the traditional data points provided, that is the most logical, rational conclusion any student of history would draw.
Right. But the date of this inauguration wasn't in 1961.
Oh.
It was January 30th, 1933.
Wow.
And the famous general wasn't Eisenhower. It was Paul von Hindenburg.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And the man I'm describing is not John F. Kennedy. It is Adolf Hitler.
Wow. That's a genuinely jarring realization.
Isn't it?
It fundamentally exposes the danger of operating on flawed or, incomplete assumptions.
Right, because we make massive decisions based on these things.
We do. We allocate resources. We interpret the entire world around us based on what we just fundamentally believe to be true.
Yeah.
But when the underlying assumptions are even slightly misaligned, it alters our entire behavioral response. We end up basically solving for the wrong variable entirely.
Exactly. And so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are dismantling those false assumptions we make every single day about success, motivation, and leadership.
It's a huge topic.
It is. We are examining the invisible architecture behind why a select few leaders and organizations are able to just effortlessly change the world.
While the vast majority continuously struggle just to manage their daily operations.
Right. And we're drawing our framework today from Simon Sinek's foundational text, Start With Why.
Such an important piece of work.
Truly. We are going to strip away the traditional metric-obsessed business theories, and we're replacing them with a framework that is actually grounded in biological reality.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But to understand the mechanics of truly inspiring leadership, we first need to diagnose the disease of modern management.
Yeah, the baseline of what everyone is doing wrong.
Exactly.
Okay.
We have to look at how the majority of the world operates when they fundamentally misunderstand the architecture of success. We need to talk about the concept of the rubber mallet.
Okay, yes, let's unpack this. The rubber mallet is a brilliant starting point. The text details a trip taken by a group of American automotive executives who traveled to Japan.
Right, back when Japanese cars were just starting to dominate.
Exactly. They were trying to figure out why Japanese cars were crushing the market in terms of reliability and build quality. So the Americans are touring a Japanese assembly line, just observing the process.
And watching how the sausage is made.
Right. And at the end of the line, the doors are attached to the hinges. But the American executives noticed a crucial step is missing.
Okay, what was it?
Well, in Detroit, at the end of the line, a worker would stand there with a literal rubber mallet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just physically tapping and whacking the edges of the car door to force it to fit perfectly into the frame.
Just hammering it into place.
Exactly. But in Japan, that job title simply didn't exist. There was no mallet.
The American executives were understandably confused, right?
Yeah.
They asked their Japanese guy, they're like, at what point in the process do you make sure the door fits?
And the guy's response is just incredible.
It really is. The guide looked at them, likely a bit perplexed by the question, and replied, "We make sure it fits when we design it."
Mind-blowing. They engineered the outcome they wanted from the absolute beginning.
Right. Rather than gathering data at the end to figure out the best way to patch the problem.
Exactly.
And that distinction is everything. If the Japanese engineers didn't achieve the desired outcome, They understood the failure occurred at the genesis of the idea.
Right, not at the execution phase on the assembly line.
Exactly. Now, consider the immediate aftermath of that. If you look at the American-made car and the Japanese-made car as they roll off the line, the doors on both appear to fit perfectly.
They look identical.
The short-term visible metric looks identical.
Yeah.
But the Japanese manufacturer didn't have to pay a worker to hammer the doors.
Right.
They didn't have to purchase the mallets. And most crucially, those Japanese doors are structurally sounder.
Oh, absolutely.
They will hold up better over a decade of use or in a collision, entirely because the components were aligned from their inception.
This exposes how so much of our economy and political landscape actually functions. I mean, we live in a rubber mallet world.
We really do.
When executives or politicians are faced with a quarter or, a polling cycle that isn't going according to plan, they don't look at the foundation.
Well, they panic.
Right. They deploy a series of highly effective short-term tactics to force the outcome they need right now.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of human influence. Stripped down to its essence, there are only two ways to alter human behavior.
Okay.
You can manipulate it or you can inspire it.
Manipulations are essentially the rubber mallets of the marketplace.
Exactly.
Let's break down how pervasive these really are. Because we hear the word manipulation and we immediately think of something nefarious or, deceitful.
Right, like brainwashing.
Yeah. But in a corporate context, manipulation is just standard operating procedure. We are talking about dropping prices,
running promotions,
utilizing fear, leveraging peer pressure, pushing aspirational messages, or relying on novelty.
All of them.
These are all engineered tactics designed to alter behavior, to basically force a purchase, a vote, or an endorsement.
What's fascinating here is the uncomfortable reality that the text highlights. These manipulations are ubiquitous for one simple reason.
What's that?
They work.
Yeah.
They are incredibly effective at driving short-term behavior. If you look at price manipulation, it is arguably the most common tactic on earth.
Oh, for sure. Black Friday, right.
Exactly. If you drop your price lower than your competitor, people will buy from you. The shelves will clear. But the underlying structural damage to the company is severe.
So let's analyze that structural damage. Because I assume dropping prices isn't inherently evil, right? It's just a basic principle of supply and demand.
Right.
If I run a store and I have too much inventory, a price drop solves my problem.
It solves the immediate inventory problem, sure. But it creates a long-term psychological problem with your consumer base.
How so?
Selling based on price operates exactly like a chemical addiction. The short-term hit is undeniable. Revenue spikes.
Okay.
But the more an organization relies on price cuts, the higher the tolerance of the consumer becomes.
Ah, I see.
Once a buyer is trained to expect a discount, getting them to pay premium or even standard retail price again is nearly impossible.
They just wait for the next sale.
Exactly. The seller is then trapped in a vicious cycle. They face overwhelming pressure from the market to push prices even lower just to maintain the same volume.
Which means profit margins evaporate.
Right. Which means they have to cut costs in research and development or customer service, which degrades the product.
Which forces them to lower the price even further.
Exactly. It's a death spiral.
And the end result of that spiral is what economists call commoditization. If your only differentiator is that you are the cheapest, your product has no soul. It's just a commodity.
Precisely. And promotions function the exact same way. The source material points to a catastrophic example involving General Motors.
Oh, GM. Yeah.
Right. For the better part of a century, GM was the undisputed titan of the U.S. auto market. But as we moved through the 1990s and into the 2000s, foreign automakers like Toyota were steadily eroding GM's market share.
Because they had better engineered, more reliable vehicles.
Exactly. Instead of fixing the foundational design, instead of addressing the door before it hit the assembly line, GM brought out the ultimate rubber mallet.
Cashback incentives.
Massive cashback incentives. We're talking promotions offering customers anywhere from $500 to $7,000 cash back just to buy a car.
A $7,000 incentive is a staggering amount of money.
It's unbelievable.
And presumably, the short-term metrics looked fantastic.
Oh, the initial data was phenomenal. Sales volume skyrocketed. The mallet fixed the door.
Right.
But let's look at the systemic cost. Those promotions annihilated GM's profit margins. The company was essentially paying people to drive their cars off the lot.
Wow.
By the year 2007, Largely due to the sheer financial weight of these incentives, GM found itself in a position where they were losing $729 on every single vehicle they sold.
Nate, really, it's $729 per car.
Per car.
They were bleeding out while celebrating high sales volume.
Exactly. And when leadership finally recognized that losing money on every transaction was an unsustainable business model, they tried to pull back. They announced a reduction in the cashback incentives.
And what happened?
The reaction was immediate. Sales flatlined. GM hadn't built brand loyalty. They had trained a generation of buyers to be promotion junkies.
So the loyalty was entirely to the cashback offer.
Exactly, not to General Motors.
That is wild. And, fear is another tactic that completely dominates our landscape. And unlike price, fear doesn't just train the consumer. It fundamentally bypasses rational thought entirely.
Because fear taps directly into our biological survival mechanisms.
Right.
When fear is introduced, whether it is a real physical threat or a manufactured anxiety about social standing, the brain deprioritizes logical analysis.
Think back to those infamous anti-drug public service announcements from the 1980s.
As a frying pan.
Yes. The narrator holds up an egg and states, "This is your brain." He then cracks the egg into a pan of violently sizzling oil and says, "This is your brain on drugs."
It's iconic. But if you think about it, it provides absolutely zero data about the chemical effects of narcotics.
None. It doesn't cite statistics.
It just presents a visceral, terrifying image of irreversible destruction.
It is the ultimate manipulation. And we see it everywhere in politics, too.
Oh, God.
Political campaigns rarely run on the nuanced details of their own policy proposals. They run on the terrifying implications of what will happen if the other person wins.
If you vote for my opponent, your way of life, your security, your children's future is in jeopardy.
Exactly. And it drives people to the polls, absolutely. But it doesn't inspire them to build anything. It only motivates them to prevent a perceived disaster.
And, I find the flip side of fear just as manipulative, which is aspiration.
Oh, yeah.
Aspirational messages tempt us with the person we wish we were. 6 easy steps to financial freedom, or lose 20 pounds before summer.
The classic New Year's resolution.
Exactly. The text points out that gym memberships reliably spike by 12% every single January. The aspiration to be healthier acts as the trigger.
By March,
the vast majority of those new members have stopped going. The manipulation successfully initiated the transaction, buying the membership, but it lacked the power to create lasting discipline or behavioral change.
which leads us to novelty. And novelty is particularly dangerous because executives constantly confuse it with actual innovation.
Motorola is the perfect case study here.
Oh, the RAZR.
Yes, in the mid-2000s, Motorola released the RAZR mobile phone. It was an aesthetic marvel at the time.
I remember everyone had one.
Aircraft-grade aluminum, impossibly thin, with a sleek, flat keypad. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie.
And the RAZR was a massive financial triumph, right? They sold over 50 million units.
They did. But the critical error Motorola made was believing they had revolutionized the industry.
They hadn't.
No. Real innovation fundamentally alters the course of human behavior or industry standards. The light bulb, the microwave oven, the iTunes store, those are innovations.
Right.
Making a phone a few millimeters thinner or adding a slightly better camera is just a shiny new object. It is a novelty.
And what happens when the novelty wears off?
The competition simply reverse engineers it. Within a couple of years, Nokia and Ericsson released phones that were just as thin.
And suddenly the RAZR was no longer special.
Exactly. Because Motorola hadn't actually innovated the software or the ecosystem, they had nothing to fall back on. Their stock plummeted, the CEO was ousted, and the company was left frantically searching for the next shiny object just to survive.
Novelty forces a company into a perpetual state of scrambling.
Always.
I want to pause and challenge this premise, though.
Sure.
We are outlining all the ways manipulations destroy long-term value. But aren't there scenarios where a transaction is the only thing we need?
Give me an example.
Let's say I lose my cat. I staple a poster to a telephone pole offering a $500 reward. That is a pure, unadulterated manipulation. It's a carrot.
Definitely.
But I don't need the person who finds my cat to believe in my overarching worldview. I don't need a deeply inspiring lifelong relationship with them. I literally just want my cat back.
That is a crucial distinction, and the framework absolutely supports that. If your objective is a single, isolated transaction, manipulations are the most efficient and effective strategy available.
Okay, good.
If law enforcement offers a cash reward for a tip leading to an arrest, they aren't looking to foster a long-term partnership with the informant. The transaction is the entirety of the goal.
So the rubber mallet is fine if you only need to fix one door one time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The systemic collapse happens when a leader or an organization desires more than a single transaction.
Right.
If you want a loyal following, if you want customers who will continue to buy from you, even when a competitor offers a cheaper price, if you want employees who will endure late nights and high stress without demanding a bonus.
Or citizens who will support a politician through a difficult economic cycle rather than abandoning them at the first sign of trouble.
Exactly. If you want that, manipulations will eventually bankrupt you. They require an ever-increasing expenditure of capital and energy to sustain, and they foster an environment defined by stress and transactional thinking.
Manipulations yield compliance. They do not yield loyalty.
Very well said.
Which naturally begs the question, if manipulations are a dead end for long-term growth, what is the alternative? How do the truly great leaders bypass the rubber mallet entirely?
This brings us to the architectural core of the text, the golden circle.
Right. Let's describe this. It's a naturally occurring pattern that the author identified across all inspiring leaders and organizations, regardless of their industry or era.
Visualize 3 concentric circles resembling a bullseye.
Okay, got it.
The outermost ring is labeled what? The middle ring is labeled HOW. And the center, the bullseye itself, is labeled WHY.
So every single organization on the planet knows what they do. This is the easiest layer to articulate. These are the tangible products they manufacture or the specific services they render.
Like we build computers, we offer legal counsel, we sell paper.
Exactly. And stepping one ring inward, some organizations know how they do what they do.
Right.
Wait, I struggle with this layer. Isn't how just a fancy corporate buzzword for marketing? Like, every company claims they have a unique process or a proprietary algorithm.
It's a fair critique, because many companies do use the HOW as a shallow marketing gimmick. But in the context of the golden circle, the HOW represents the actual operational infrastructure of a belief. It's the differentiating value proposition. It might be a rigorously disciplined supply chain, a highly specific hiring process, or a deeply ingrained culture of radical transparency. It is the action taken to realize the goal.
Okay, so what is the product? How W is the specific process used to create it? But then we hit the center circle.
The WHY. Very few organizations and remarkably few individuals can clearly articulate WHY they do what they do.
And we need to establish a hard boundary here.
Yes.
Making money is not a WHY.
Thank you. Yes. Making money is merely a result of the what and the HOW. A WHY is a fundamental purpose, a cause, or a belief.
Why does your organization exist beyond turning a profit?
Exactly. Why did you drag yourself out of bed this morning? And fundamentally, why should anyone else care?
This is where we see the divergence in communication. The vast majority of companies communicate from the outside in.
Right, from the what to the WHY.
Yeah. They start with the clearest, most tangible thing and move toward the fuzziest. They tell you what they do, they tell you how they are better than the competition, and then they wait for you to execute a transaction.
Apple is the quintessential case study here, not because they are perfect, but because their communication strategy is so radically different and highly visible.
Let's do the example.
Let's imagine Apple communicated like a standard outside-in corporation. Their pitch would sound something like this. We make great computers. They are beautifully designed, simple to use, and incredibly user-friendly. Want to buy one?
I mean, it's a completely sterile list of features. It gives me data, but it gives me absolutely no reason to care.
And yet that is exactly how most advertising and political messaging operates. Here's our law firm. Our partners graduated from Harvard and Yale. Hire us.
Here is our candidate. She has a comprehensive 12-point plan for tax reform. Vote for her.
Exactly. It is an appeal entirely to reason.
Here's where it gets really interesting. But the organizations that command actual loyalty, they invert the process. They communicate from the inside out. They start with the WHY.
Let's rewire that Apple pitch to reflect their actual messaging.
It sounds like this. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. And we just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one?
Notice the profound shift in how that makes you feel.
Yeah, it's huge.
The information is identical, but the sequence has been reversed. They didn't lead with a manipulation, a price cut, or a celebrity endorsement. They led with a deeply held belief, challenging the status quo.
The computer is no longer the reason to buy. The computer is merely the tangible proof that Apple's belief is real.
The core mantra of the text is, People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
And we must emphasize that this is not merely a clever linguistic trick. This isn't a theory cooked up in a Madison Avenue advertising agency.
No, it's biology. Golden Circle is a direct overlay of human neuroanatomy.
This shifts the entire conversation from business strategy to biology. If you take a cross-section of the human brain, looking at it from the top down, the levels of the Golden Circle correspond flawlessly with the major evolutionary levels of our brain.
Right. The newest section of the brain, the part that makes us uniquely Homo sapiens, is the neocortex.
That corresponds directly to the what level?
Exactly. The neocortex is the domain of rational thought, analytical processing, and the deduction of facts and figures. Crucially, the neocortex is also the center for all human language.
It is incredibly powerful at analyzing data, but it is also highly energy-intensive and slow.
Right. And below the neocortex, you have the middle two sections of the brain, which comprise the limbic system.
And the limbic brain corresponds perfectly to the HOW and the WHY.
This is the biological fulcrum of the entire theory. The limbic brain is responsible for all of our feelings: trust, loyalty, love, fear. They all originate here. More importantly, the limbic brain is responsible for all human behavior and all decision-making.
Wow.
But there is a massive biological catch. The limbic brain possesses zero capacity for language.
Let's pause on that, because the implications are massive. The part of our brain that actually makes the final decision on what to buy, who to vote for, or who to marry literally does not have the neurological wiring to speak.
Which perfectly explains why humans struggle so profoundly to articulate their deepest feelings. It is an actual biological disconnect.
Think about trying to explain to someone why you love your spouse. If someone presses you for reasons, you invariably start listing features. You say, well, she completes me, she has a great sense of humor, she's brilliant, she supports my career. But your neocortex is just desperately scrambling to rationalize a feeling that resides entirely in the limbic system.
Exactly. There are millions of funny, brilliant, supportive people on the planet. But you didn't marry them.
Right. You married your partner because of a profound feeling of connection. But because that feeling lives in a language-free zone, you are reduced to rattling off a list of attributes that sound like a resume.
This biological reality is the exact mechanism behind what we call a gut decision. Gut decisions do not originate in your digestive tract.
Right.
They occur when your limbic brain has rapidly processed an alignment of values and made a decision, but your slower, language-bound neocortex hasn't caught up yet to provide the rationalization. You literally feel the decision before you can explain it.
This completely shifts how we view traditional economics, which assumes that human beings are purely rational actors who will always choose the product with the best features at the lowest price.
Because if the biology dictates that the limbic system actually makes the call, pitching only features is biologically inefficient.
Think about walking into a massive electronics store like Best Buy to buy a television. You are standing in front of a wall of 50 screens. A salesperson walks up and starts bombarding your neocortex with the what?
Firing off data points.
Yeah, pixel density, refresh rates, contrast ratios, HDMI ports.
And what happens to the consumer? They experience cognitive overload. The neocortex is trying to process all those variables, comparing them against each other, trying to mathematically deduce the optimal choice.
It is exhausting, and it generates massive anxiety.
But when a company communicates from the inside out, when they start with a WHY, they bypass the analytical traffic jam of the neocortex and speak directly to the limbic brain.
They establish trust and alignment first.
Exactly. By the time they introduce the screen size or the price, the limbic brain has already decided, I trust this brand, this feels right. And the neocortex simply uses those specs to justify the decision to others.
It is the biological delta between I think this is the right decision and I feel this is the right decision.
And when an individual or an organization possesses absolute clarity of WHY, the conviction elevates to I know it's right.
That explains the external dynamic perfectly. It explains why a consumer buys an Apple product or a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. But what about the people actually building the products? How does this biology apply to the internal mechanics of a company?
It applies through the evolutionary imperative to belong. Humans are social animals, heavily reliant on tribal structures for survival.
Right. If we go back to the ancestral savanna, finding people who shared your values wasn't a networking event, it was life or death.
Exactly. Trust equated to survival. If you were surrounded by a tribe that shared your fundamental beliefs, you could fall asleep at night knowing someone was keeping watch. You could leave your family to hunt, trusting they would be protected.
We have not evolved past that biological craving.
Not at all. We are constantly scanning our environment, seeking out cultures and organizations where we feel safe, understood, and valued. We want to be around people who believe what we believe.
Which exposes a massive flaw in modern recruitment. Most companies hire purely for the what. They look at a resume to see if the candidate has the requisite skills and experience.
But if you want to build an organization that can survive adversity, hiring for skills is insufficient. You have to hire for the WHY.
The historical record provides a legendary case study on this principle. Let's examine Ernest Shackleton's 1914 Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition.
Shackleton was attempting the first land crossing of the Antarctic continent.
Right. The conditions he was preparing for were brutal sub-zero temperatures, treacherous ice, and months of total isolation. Now, if Shackleton were a modern corporate recruiter, he would have placed an ad listing the what wanted. Sailors with 5 years of polar experience must know how to navigate pack ice.
He would have looked for technical proficiency.
But Shackleton understood the extremity of the environment. Technical proficiency wouldn't prevent a mutiny when men were freezing and starving. So he allegedly placed a very different kind of ad in the London Times.
What did it say?
It read, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success."
It is, on paper, an objectively terrible job description. It guarantees misery and hints at death.
Rationally, it is absurd. But limbically, it is a masterpiece of filtering.
Oh, totally.
Anyone reading that ad who was primarily motivated by a steady paycheck or comfortable working conditions, would immediately turn the page. The only individuals who applied were men who read that description of guaranteed suffering and thought, that sounds like a glorious adventure.
Shackleton didn't attract employees, he attracted believers. He recruited men who inherently shared his worldview regarding endurance and exploration.
And the historical outcome validates the method. Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, became inextricably trapped in the pack ice of the Weddell Sea. It was slowly crushed over a period of 10 months.
The crew was stranded on the drifting ice floes, facing insurmountable odds.
Yet, throughout the entire ordeal, there was no mutiny. Not a single member of the 28-van crew perished. They survived a multi-year nightmare because the culture was forged entirely around a shared WHY.
We see the same principle applied in modern corporate environments, albeit with lower stakes. Southwest Airlines in the 1970s is a prime example.
Yeah.
Southwest's WHY was to champion the common man, to democratize air travel and make it fun and accessible. When they were hiring flight attendants, they didn't exclusively poach experienced staff from established airlines like Delta or United.
What did they do?
They famously recruited ex-cheerleaders and majorettes.
Which sounds completely unhinged if you are running an airline.
It does, if you're only looking at the what. But look at the WHY. Cheerleaders and majorettes are fundamentally wired for optimism. Their entire disposition is oriented toward leading crowds, lifting spirits, and projecting energy.
They naturally embodied Southwest's cause.
Exactly. Southwest recognized that you cannot teach someone to have an inherently joyful, optimistic disposition. But you can easily teach an optimistic person how to serve a beverage and demonstrate safety equipment. They hired the attitude, and they trained the skill.
The text illustrates this beautifully with the parable of the two stonemasons. You walk up to a construction site and ask the first stonemason what he's doing. He wipes the sweat off his brow, gestures to the heavy stones, and complains about the monotonous labor, the scorching heat, and the miserable pay.
He is fully fixated on the what. He has a job.
Then you walk 30 feet down the same wall, and you ask the second stonemason, who is performing the exact same grueling physical labor. He looks up and says, "I love my job. I am building a cathedral."
He's connected to the WHY. The labor is identical, but the psychological context is entirely different.
The first stonemason will quit the moment another contractor offers him 50 cents more an hour. The second stonemason is immovable because his work is tethered to a higher purpose.
When an organization is populated by people building a cathedral, the internal dynamic shifts from transactional compliance to profound systemic trust.
And trust is the essential component of innovation. I love the analogy used here. Trust acts as an invisible trapeze net.
Consider a trapeze artist in a circus. If you place a safety net below them, well, they have the psychological freedom to attempt daring, unprecedented maneuvers. They will push the boundaries of their physical capability because they know that if they fail, the net will catch them.
Right.
If you remove that net, the artist will only ever execute safe, conservative, previously mastered routines. They will not risk a fatal fall.
Makes total sense.
In an organization, a culture built on a shared WHY provides that psychological safety net. When employees trust that their leadership and their peers will support them through a failure, they will take the risks necessary to innovate.
The story of General Lori Robinson perfectly illustrates this. She achieved incredible distinction in the United States Air Force, eventually becoming a 4-star general and the first female commander of a major combatant command.
Quite an accomplishment.
But early in her career, she faced a massive hurdle. She wasn't a pilot. In the Air Force hierarchy, pilots are the elite. She was an air weapons controller. Her job was to sit at a radar console and guide the pilots in the air.
It is a position that historically commands less prestige. But Captain Robinson didn't view her job through the lens of the simply reading blips on a radar screen.
No, she defined her WHY as clearing a path.
Right.
She believed that her singular purpose was to provide the pilots with such flawless information and absolute security that they could focus entirely on their mission without constantly looking over their shoulders.
She was the architect of their safety net. And there was a highly intense moment involving a senior pilot, General John Jumper, during a massive combat simulation.
What happened?
Jumper was a highly decorated, incredibly experienced fighter pilot. During the simulation, he got hyper-focused on a target, lost his situational awareness, and ignored Captain Robinson's repeated radio warnings about an incoming threat.
Oh, no.
As a result, his aircraft took a simulated direct hit.
The fallout was explosive. General Jumper stormed into the debriefing room, furious, and publicly blamed Robinson, shouting, "You got me killed."
But the playback tapes completely exonerated her. They proved she had provided perfect data and repeated warnings. Jumper had simply let his ego override his trust in her. He had ignored the net.
And what made Robinson exceptional wasn't just that she was right, it was how she consistently reinforced that culture of trust afterward. She constantly drilled into her own subordinates that their jobs were never about their own glory. It was entirely about protecting the pilots.
Because she dedicated her career to clearing a path for others, those below her trusted her implicitly, and they worked tirelessly to clear a path for her advancement.
Now let's contrast that robust net of trust with an environment devoid of it. Let's look at the catastrophic collapse of Barings Bank in 1995.
This is a fascinating counterexample. Barings Bank wasn't a volatile startup. It was the oldest merchant bank in London.
Right, it had survived the Napoleonic Wars, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars.
Yet, it was completely obliterated by a single 28-year-old rogue trader named Nick Leeson working out of a branch in Singapore.
How does a structurally massive institution fall to one person?
It fell because the internal culture at Barings was entirely reliant on the what. It was a culture driven exclusively by the pursuit of massive financial bonuses and personal prestige. There was no shared belief, no collective WHY.
Just a free-for-all.
Pretty much. Leeson was making incredibly reckless, unauthorized, speculative trades on the futures market. When he started losing money, instead of admitting the error, he hid the massive losses in a secret, unmonitored air account, famously known as the 88888 account.
But surely someone in London management noticed the discrepancies. The amounts he was trading were astronomical.
People did notice anomalies. Other traders and risk managers suspected something was deeply wrong because Leeson's reported profits seemed impossible.
So why did they stop him?
Here's where the lack of trust proves fatal. In an environment driven solely by self-interest, asking questions carries immense risk. If a manager raised an alarm and was wrong, they would look foolish, or worse, they might accidentally derail the bank's star earner and jeopardize their own year-end bonus.
So everyone stayed quiet.
They protected their own immediate interests rather than protecting the institution. Fear of looking incompetent superseded the duty to the tribe. By the time the truth surfaced, Leeson had lost over $1 billion, and the centuries-old bank was insolvent.
That is the ultimate cost of an organization without a net. So we've established the necessity of discovering a WHY and how that shared belief builds an internal fortress of trust. But that solves the internal problem.
Right.
What happens when you try to take that belief to the market? How do you get the rest of the world to care about your cathedral?
To understand how ideas spread through a population, we have to look at a sociological model called the law of diffusion of innovations. This is a standard bell curve that maps the adoption rate of any new product, behavior, or idea across a society.
Let's map out the curve. On the extreme left side, you have the innovators. They make up roughly 2.5% of the population. Next to them are the early adopters, comprising about 13.5%. Then you hit the massive hump of the bell curve, the early majority and the late majority, each sitting at 34%. Finally, trailing on the far right, you have the laggards making up the last 16%.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychology of each group is vastly different. Innovators are visionaries. They aggressively pursue new ideas simply because they are new. They will tolerate bugs, glitches, and high prices just to be the first to experience a paradigm shift.
Early adopters are similar. They don't generate the ideas, but they are quick to recognize the potential and are willing to take a calculated risk on an unproven concept.
But then you hit the early majority. And between the early adopters and the early majority lies a massive psychological barrier, often referred to as the chasm.
The chasm exists because the early majority are pragmatists. Their psychology is fundamentally risk-averse. They will not try something new until someone else has tried it first and proven that it works. They require social proof. They don't care about vision, they care about reliability.
And here is where most companies completely misallocate their resources. They look at that bell curve, they see that the vast majority of the money is sitting in the middle with the early and late majority, and they point all their marketing directly at them.
They pitch the what, they list features, they lower prices, they try to convince the pragmatists to take a leap.
But the pragmatists won't leap because the pitch doesn't mitigate their fear of risk. To achieve mass market success, a movement must reach the tipping point, which is roughly 15 to 18% market penetration.
You cannot force the middle of the curve to move.
You must target the left side of the curve, the innovators and the early adopters. These are the individuals whose limbic brains make decisions based on intuition and shared belief. They buy your product not just for its functional utility, but for what owning it says about them. They use your product to signal their own WHY to the world.
The launch of TiVo is a tragic masterclass in failing to understand this curve. When TiVo hit the market in the late 90s, it was an absolute miracle of engineering. It was the first mainstream digital video recorder.
But they completely botched the messaging.
They pointed their advertising straight at the early majority and pitched the what? They ran ads explaining, it pauses live TV, it skips commercials, it memorizes your viewing habits and record shows on its own.
And what was the reaction of the pragmatist mass market? They recoiled. They said, I don't understand this machine. It sounds like it's spying on me. You're scaring me.
They terrified the very people they were trying to court. But if TiVo had understood the golden circle, they would have aimed entirely at the innovators. The pitch wouldn't have been about pausing live TV. It would have been an appeal to belief.
If you are the kind of person who demands total control over every aspect of your life, we have a tool for you. It pauses live TV. It skips commercials.
That subtle shift in messaging changes everything. The features are no longer terrifying alien technology. They are tangible proof of a shared belief in autonomy and control.
The innovators would have bought it immediately. They would have endured the clunky early software. And more importantly, they would have enthusiastically demonstrated it to their friends in the early majority, providing the exact social proof the pragmatists needed to cross the chasm.
But because TiVo marketed from the outside in, they stalled out and burned through their capital.
This brings us to a structural visualization of the organization itself. If the golden circle is the message, how does a massive company ensure that message actually reaches the left side of the bell curve?
Imagine taking the 2D bullseye of the golden circle and pulling the center upward, transforming it into a three-dimensional cone or a megaphone.
At the very top, the absolute point of the cone is the leader. The leader embodies the WHY. They are the visionary. Just below them, in the widening section of the cone, is the HOW level.
These are the senior executives, the operational experts who are inspired by the leader's vision and possess the logistical skills to build the infrastructure required to manifest it.
The visionary sees the destination, the executives build the road.
Exactly. And at the wide bottom base of the megaphone is the what. This section represents the vast majority of the employees, the physical products, the marketing campaigns, and the customer service interactions.
For a company to successfully reach the market, the megaphone must be loud, meaning it requires capital and reach. But far more critical than volume is clarity.
So what does this all mean? How do we ensure clarity in the real world?
The text offers a brilliant mental model for this called the celery test. I want you to imagine your own shopping cart at work as we walk through this.
Imagine you are at an upscale dinner party, surrounded by highly successful, intelligent entrepreneurs. You casually mention you're looking for ways to grow your business.
One entrepreneur pulls you aside and says, you know what you need, M&Ms. We integrated M&Ms into our model, and revenue spiked.
Another CEO overhears and says, no, M&Ms are outdated. Rice milk is the future. You have to pivot to rice milk.
A third insists that Oreo cookies are the only proven growth metric. And a fourth firmly tells you that celery is the secret to capturing the modern market.
Now, you want to be successful. And these are smart people. So you go to the supermarket and you buy all of it. You load your cart with M&Ms, rice milk, Oreos, and celery. You have spent a massive amount of capital, time, and energy.
But here is the critical failure.
When you are standing in the checkout line and your customers or your employees look at your cart, they see a chaotic, contradictory mess. They have absolutely no idea what you stand for.
Are you a health brand? A junk food brand? You have no identity.
You fell into the trap of chasing every piece of seemingly valid advice without an internal filter. But let's replay the scenario. What if, before you ever walked into that dinner party, you had done the hard work of discovering your WHY? What if your fundamental belief is to always do things that promote physical health and vitality?
Armed with that clarity, you attend the exact same party. You receive the exact same advice from the exact same successful people. But when you walk into the supermarket, your WHY acts as an automatic, ruthless filter.
You walk right past the M&Ms, you ignore the Oreos, you only place the celery and the rice milk into your cart.
You spent less money. You wasted less time. And when you stand in that checkout line, anyone looking at your cart knows instantaneously and unambiguously exactly what you believe.
Your what is perfectly aligned with your WHY. The megaphone is completely clear. Every hire you make, every software feature you develop, every marketing dollar you spend must pass the celery test. If it doesn't align with your deeply held belief, you must leave it on the shelf, regardless of how profitable it might seem in the short term.
That is a phenomenal tool. But let's take it a step further. What happens when an organization passes the celery test for years? They have a clear WHY, their products are revolutionary, they achieve massive, undeniable success, and then, seemingly overnight, they lose their soul.
They become exactly the kind of corporate monolith they originally fought against. What is the mechanics of that decay?
The author terms this phenomenon the split. And the bitter irony is that the single greatest threat to an inspiring organization is not failure. It is the sheer weight of its own success.
I think of it like an underground indie rock band. When they first start out playing in a garage, their WHY is pure. They are rebelling against the manufactured pop music on the radio. The singer writes deeply personal lyrics. The guitarist plays with raw emotion.
Their what? The music is a direct manifestation of their WHY. They attract a small, fiercely loyal group of early adopters who resonate with that rebellion.
That is the perfect analogy for a startup in its infancy. The founder's WHY and the company's what are in absolute parallel alignment. The founder is physically present, making limbic gut decisions and radiating the passion that fuels the early team.
But then the indie band gets successful. They sign to a major label. Suddenly, there are managers, PR agents, and massive financial expectations. The venues get bigger, the megaphone gets much, much wider.
And the label executives, the HLW and the what guys, start looking at the metrics. They say, if we just polish the production a bit and maybe write a chorus that appeals to the early majority, we could double our record sales.
And that is the exact moment the split occurs. The organization becomes hyper-focused on the tangible metrics of success: the revenue, the market share, the stock price. The what begins to outpace the WHY. The physical volume of the megaphone drowns out the clarity of the original message.
Walmart is the definitive corporate tragedy in this regard. When Sam Walton founded Walmart, his WHY was unshakable. He believed deeply in serving the community and championing the working class.
His method for manifesting that belief, his how W, was maintaining incredibly low prices so that everyday people could afford the same quality of life as the wealthy.
He was notoriously frugal, famously driving a beat-up old pickup truck, because he viewed every dollar saved on corporate luxury as a dollar he could pass back to his community.
But look at the trajectory after Walton passed away. The organization experienced a catastrophic split. The subsequent leadership maintained the operational focus on low prices, the what, but they entirely amputated the WHY.
They confused the metric of success, which was vast profitability, with the original purpose of serving people. As a result, modern Walmart is frequently criticized for ruthlessly squeezing suppliers, depressing wages, and decimating the local economies of the very communities Sam Walton intended to uplift.
They still deliver the cheap goods, but the limbic connection to the cause is dead. The company transitioned from a cathedral to a highly efficient, ruthless machine.
Which introduces the ultimate litmus test for corporate longevity. the school bus test. The premise is dark but necessary. If the visionary founder steps off the curb tomorrow and gets hit by a school bus, will the organization survive, or will it drift aimlessly without its compass?
For an organization to pass the school bus test, the founder's WHY cannot remain trapped in their own head. It must be meticulously extracted and institutionalized into the very fabric of the corporate culture. It has to become bigger than the personality of the leader.
Microsoft is a fascinating example of failing the school bus test. Bill Gates was undeniably a visionary. His original WHY was about empowerment, giving everyday people the tools to achieve their highest potential. That belief manifested in the audacious goal of putting a personal computer on every desk in every home.
But as Microsoft swelled into a global behemoth, Gates began to step back. The problem was, he hadn't successfully institutionalized that underlying cause. He handed the reins to Steve Ballmer.
And Steve Ballmer was an incredibly intelligent, highly capable executive, but he was fundamentally a what leader? He was driven by metrics, market dominance, and crushing the competition.
Right. Under Ballmer, Microsoft stopped asking, how do we empower people? And started asking, how do we beat Apple? Or how do we kill Google?
They spent billions chasing novelties like the Zune or the Windows Phone purely as reactionary tactics. They lost their WHY, and for a decade, their stock price stagnated while they scrambled to defend their market share.
But contrast that stagnation with Costco. Costco was co-founded by Jim Sinek, a man who actually learned the discount retail business working alongside the same pioneers as Sam Walton. Sinek was fiercely dedicated to a people-first philosophy. He believed that if you treated employees exceptionally well, they would treat the customers exceptionally well, and the business would thrive.
He paid his floor workers significantly above the national average and provided robust health benefits.
And Wall Street hated him for it. Financial analysts constantly pressured him, telling him he was leaving money on the table, demanding he cut wages to inflate the quarterly profit margins.
But Sinek refused to yield. He wouldn't fail the salary test. He institutionalized his WHY so deeply into Costco's management training and daily operations that it became impervious to external pressure. And the financial results over the long term are undeniable.
If an investor had purchased stock in Walmart on the exact day Sam Walton died, they would have seen a respectable 300% return over the following decades. But if that same investor had put their money into Costco on that exact same day, their investment would have grown by over 800%.
Costco successfully navigated the split because the culture was tethered to a belief, not just a price point.
Okay, this brings us to the most actionable part of this entire framework. If an organization is facing the split, or if an individual listening to this realizes they are stuck in the what of their own career, how do they find their WHY? Do you just hire a branding agency to invent one?
That is the most common mistake organizations make. You cannot invent a WHY. You don't sit in a sterile conference room, stare at consumer demographics, and decide, our new WHY is going to be synergy, innovation, and customer centricity. That is just marketing jargon designed to manipulate. A true WHY is not forward-looking, it is entirely backward-looking. It is a process of discovery, not invention.
It's an archaeological dig into your own past.
Exactly. An individual's WHY is formed very early in life, typically by their late teens. It is forged through their upbringing, the specific trials they endured, and the environment that shaped them. It is a recurring pattern of behavior that has always been present, even if they never had the language to define it.
Let's look at Apple again. Their WHY, challenging the status quo and empowering the individual, wasn't a strategic pivot cooked up to sell hardware. It was discovered by looking at the genesis of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
They came of age in Northern California during the late 1960s and 1970s. They were deeply embedded in the counterculture movement, surrounded by anti-war protests and a profound distrust of massive centralized authority, whether that authority was the government or a monolithic corporation like IBM.
They viewed these massive institutions as crushing the spirit of the individual. When Wozniak built the first Apple circuit board in the Homebrew Computer Club, he wasn't trying to build a billion-dollar tech empire. He was building a tool to give the average person the computing power previously reserved for giant corporations. The personal computer wasn't their cause. It was simply the physical weapon they forged to fight their war against the status quo. Their WHY was discovered in their rebellious youth.
The author, Simon Sinek, shares his own deeply personal story of discovery in the text. He had achieved what most would consider the pinnacle of success. He owned his own consulting firm, he was making great money, he had the prestigious clients. But about 3 years in, he hit a wall. He fell into a deep depression. He was paralyzed by anxiety. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was very good at how he did it. But he had entirely lost his passion. He was experiencing a personal split.
And his initial instinct, like most of us, was to treat and fix the what. He tried to change his client base, tweak his services, or adjust his pricing. But none of the rubber mallets cured the depression. It wasn't until he stopped looking forward and started looking backwards that the paradigm shifted.
He looked at the pattern of his entire life, his friendships, his time in school, his previous careers. He realized that the only times he felt truly fulfilled were when he was helping others find their own path. He was the eternal optimist. His defining pattern, his fundamental cause, was inspiring people to believe they could achieve the impossible. Once he distilled that into language to inspire people to do the things that inspire them, the fog lifted. The consulting, the writing, the speaking engagements, those were no longer a stressful grind. They were just the tangible whats he used to execute his newly discovered WY.
And the moment an individual or an organization discovers that underlying WHY, it completely revolutionizes their relationship with competition. When you operate without a WHY, your daily existence is defined by a finite game. You wake up every morning obsessed with beating the guy across the street. You are constantly monitoring their prices, their features, their ad campaigns, and reacting out of fear. It is a perpetual, exhausting state of defense.
But when you discover your WHY, you stop looking across the street. You realize you aren't actually running against them. You are only competing against yourself.
The focus shifts entirely inward. The overarching goal is no longer to bankrupt the competitor. The goal is simply to ensure that the work you are producing today is a better, clearer manifestation of your cause than the work you produced 6 months ago. You are actively seeking out customers and employees who share your belief, inviting them to stand shoulder to shoulder with you to advance that cause. If a consumer doesn't share your belief and prefers the competitor's product, that isn't a defeat. It simply means they aren't part of your tribe, and that is perfectly acceptable. It liberates an organization to pursue excellence rather than just market dominance.
This has been a profound dismantling of how we view the world. We started by discarding the rubber mallets, the endless, exhausting cycle of price drops, fear-mongering, and novelty that organizations use to manipulate short-term compliance at the severe cost of long-term loyalty. We took the golden circle and mapped it directly onto human biology, proving that when you communicate from the inside out, starting with your WHY, you aren't just using a clever marketing tactic. You are literally speaking the language of the limbic brain, the exact neurological center of all human trust and decision-making.
We examined how that shared limbic belief acts as an invisible trapeze net within an organization, empowering leaders like General Laurie Robinson to foster an environment of absolute trust where innovation thrives, while the absence of that net leads to the catastrophic self-destruction of institutions like Barings Bank. We diagnosed the mechanics of the chasm and the law of diffusion, proving why you must target the innovators. And we established the celery test as the ultimate filter to maintain the clarity of your megaphone.
We tracked the dangerous mechanics of the split, that perilous moment when the metrics of success begin to drown out the founding cause, as we saw with Walmart and Microsoft. And we learned that the only way to survive the school bus test is to look backward into your own history, discover your underlying pattern, and institutionalize it.
As we wrap up this analysis, I challenge you to apply this framework to your own life today. Look at the last major purchase you made, the political candidate you most recently supported, or the job you're currently sitting in. Be ruthlessly honest with yourself. Did you choose those things using your neocortex, based on a cold, rational spreadsheet of pros and cons? Or did your limbic brain make the call because it resonated with a deeper belief, and you merely used the features to justify the feeling? If you strip away the what of your daily routine, the emails, the meetings, the title on your business card, what is the underlying WHY that is actually propelling you forward?
Because if you don't know your own WHY, you will spend your life being manipulated by the whats of everyone else. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Challenge your assumptions, find your clarity, and we will see you next time.